here, guys, in the section. And today I'm going to talk about how thinking in React might help in filling this gap that we have between UX and development. First, let me spend a few words about me. So as you can see, I really don't like travels and relocations. And I love to spend my free time crashing on the sofa, and I suppose I'm one of the best guitarists in our center. Of course, I'm joking. I can play a guitar in front of an audience before I finish my second beer. And I'm quite a vivacious guy. Currently, I work as Frontend in ProntoPro. ProntoPro.it is a local studies marketplace which connects small businesses, artisans, and self-employed workers with people in need of them. We're a startup, but we're growing very fast. The headquarters are here in Milan, but we already expanded in Austria and Switzerland, and we want more. The working environment is super nice and young and full of talents. The good news is that we are hiring, so if you are looking for new challenges, just check the open position on our website and hit us up. So just a quick look about the agenda. So at the beginning we're going to understand why we need a bridge and what is the gap that we need to fill. Then we're going to see a very quick introduction to React and how it works. Then we're going to see what thinking in React means and how it might help us in filling this gap. In particular, we're going to see how to break the UI into pieces and how to spot the minimum complete representation of the state, and how to exploit composition over inheritance. At the end, we're going to get some, we're going to summarize everything. We're going to try to get some conclusions and considerations. So let's think about this gap. Let's face it, UX and development have different gaps. So, they have tools gap, and we're trying to fill these gaps with tools that convert design system to code. We have communication problems, and we're going to solve this by meeting more often or trying to align our languages and our dialects. But today I'm going to talk to you about a different gap. For explaining you this gap, I'm going to describe a scenario I faced far too many times in my life. It goes more or less like this. So there's this conference room, and in this conference room there is the product team, and the design team, and the tech team, the engineers. And product and design just finished presenting the new shining set of features to tech. So they are very enthusiastic about them. They smile at the audience, but the audience is very cold. There's just cold silence. All the engineers are whispering, and then suddenly somebody breaks the silence, raises the hand, and says, "But do we really need to build this?" Well, I'm sure that many of you can relate to this situation. At the end of this presentation, what happens at the end of this presentation is that the engineers are just frustrated. They feel like designers are just loading features onto them without taking care of their needs, without taking care of their concerns. Well, they're going to be the ones who are going to bear the brunt of the work, and they're going to be the ones that are going to face very stressful times if things go every in production. On the other side, the designers think that the engineers are totally not interested in delighting the user experience and satisfying their basic needs. This cats and dogs, of course, is sterile. It doesn't produce anything good. It's pointless, and it's bad for morale. It's bad for the end users. It's bad for the company. Both engineers and designers instead should just work together. They should empathize with each other. They should try to understand each other's concern. They should make each other an important piece of their process. But what does concern engineers so much? Well, in most of the cases, bad code quality affects user experience in predictable ways. Let's think about slowness or just a bug in production. They both can cause the customers to flee and never come back. But the biggest threat of bad code quality is code complexity and also code entropy. This is what engineers have on their minds when they push back on design. When they say, do we really need to build this? How we want to change all the buttons in our code base. Code complexity is subtle, creepy, and tricky. It likes to show up suddenly, and it grows over time by slowing your product's ability to change, adapt, and innovate. We can think about code complexity like a tax we need to pay every time we want to do something with our product in the future. Also, and more dangerous, sometimes it can reach points of no return. And that is a real threat for your product, of course. On the other hand, code complexity is very hard to understand from designers and engineers, and product, because it often weighs heavily on engineers. So many times in the company, engineers are the only ones that pay attention to it. And this can create scenarios of hostility. So what can we do about that? Well, there's no magic recipe about this, so there's no very quick solution. But in my experience, I've seen that bringing into conversation discussing about code complexity at a very early stage helps, and it helps a lot. And the other thing that we could do is every time we add a new feature, we should try to keep low this complexity tax, or even lower its level. But how can we do that? Well, this is not an easy thing to do, of course. The first thing that should happen is that engineers and designers should be of the same wavelength, so designers should look at things from an engineer perspective. And this, also, they should synchronize on the fact that they are not just building a new feature set, but they are working on a complex system, and at the same time trying to keep this complexity tax low. And here is where, according to me, React and thinking in React might give its contribution. Why I picked React? Because React is not just a tech tool. React is like a bunch of good practices and good patterns that can positively impact both the engineers and designers. Indeed, thinking in React helps engineers to organize their code in a more solid and scalable way. And if we are talking about code complexity, take my word for it, React scales like a charm. And it helps designers to have this engineering perspective when they look at UI. It is easy to understand for both engineers and designers because it's made of very basic concepts, so it's quick to grasp. And last but not least, it brings complexity into conversation at a very early stage. And it does it naturally. So, how many of you are using React in your companies? So, yes, just a quick introduction. React is a JavaScript library that allows you to build user interfaces with no pain. With no pain because it takes care of all the parts of the render, so data change, and React re-renders with our components. The other thing that allows us to do is to break up our UI into encapsulated components, and which are independent and usable, and we can think and we can design them in isolation, then we can use them wherever we want. For better understanding React and how thinking in React works, having a very stupid app, we're gonna refer to it as we go through this talk. It is called Story Maker, and it is just a random story generator. It was more or less like this. So you just pop up the configurator and then you write the gender and the name of the protagonist of the story, and then it will pop you a new story. You can read your stories and mark a story as a favorite. Sorry, it's not really visible, the gray. Okay, so as I said, we're gonna refer to it as we go through the presentation. When we speak about React, the first thing we should talk about is components, because they are the building blocks of such a technology. Components are software modules that do something, and as such, are part of a hierarchy. Now, in React, this hierarchy has some constraints. So, first of all, it must start from a root component, and then it grows like a tree, in this case, an upside-down tree. So another constraint is that each component could have one or more children, but only one parent. We can also, from the concept point of view, we can look at components like they are math functions. So they take something in input, which we're going to call props, and they release something in output, which is what we see now on our screens. Components are very good in lowering the complexity tasks because, as I say, they are reusable, independent, and we can design them in isolation. Also, they allow us to use the divide et impera, divide and conquer approach. That it is a computer science approach that says that we can always split a complex problem in small subproblems and then solve them individually. So, extracting components from a UI might seem like grunt work at first, but having a palette, a set of useful components really helps when we have complex UI and big and larger apps. But when do we know when a component boundaries, where a component boundaries start and end? Well, we can follow the single responsibility principle for that. This is another computer science principle that says that every software module must do at most one thing. So whenever our UI grows in complexity, we could always split it in some components. So we shouldn't have components that do more than one thing. Another good thing is that components can use other components in their output. So in our UI, let's say we can have a dialog, which in turn uses a toolbar, which inside has a button, which uses an icon on it. And this is super nice because these components are encapsulated and isolated, but we can move them through whatever abstraction level of our app and our UI. And here is an example of our story maker split into components. As you can see, there is the top part, which is our configurator, which in turn uses other components inside, which are the title, the label, select, text input, and so on. And this allows us to break complexity in small parts and have a reusable set of components which we can use wherever we want. Another very important concept for understanding React is the concept of props. So props are the means with which we give knowledge to our components. Now, props are also the way through which components speak to each other, but this communication has some constraints as well. So this is also called unidirectional communication because it can only flow from top to bottom of our tree. And so it's also called top-down communication. Another constraint is that from the component point of view, prop types are read-only. So components can use props for adapting their output, but they can't manipulate props. Also, React components should always behave like Q functions. So given a certain input, they should always return the same output. Let's see how props play with render. So let's assume that each component of our tree gets initialized with a given set of props. When these props change, these components become dirty. What React does is that it picks all the dirty components and re-render them, so they can adapt to these props changes. And this is what is happening here to the heart icon. So at the beginning, it gets initialized with a prop. let's say it's called highlighted, and this prop is false, when we set this prop to true, then this component will become dirty and React will re-render it, and then the output will be adjusted to the prop. But of course our UI are more complex than this, and sometimes we need to react to other things like network responses and user interactions. So how would we do that? And this is where we speak about the state. The states are more or less similar to props, but they are private, and they live inside a component that can only be manipulated by that component. So each component will set and change its own state. And the component can choose it to be stateless or stateful, and the component A will never know if the component B is stateful or stateless, and the component A will never know what is the state of the component B. So that's why the state is also called local state or encapsulated state. It lives inside the component. So how do I communicate my state? Well, I could pass it as a prop. Okay, this is what happens here in this small example. So the blue dots are the components with the state, and when they manipulate their state, they pass it as a prop downwards, and then the children component can react to those props. So another best practice that React endorses is to find all the minimal, complete representation of the state in our app, and also find where the state should live. And this is very important. So in our example app, I've found 3 components that hold the state. The first one is to be configured, and the first state is open, which decides if the configuration is shunned or expanded. And then the gender of the name of the protagonist, of course, the configurator needs it for creating new story. Then there is the story component here in the belly of the app, and it has a date, favorite, which is a boolean that says the story has been marked as favorite, a picture and text, and then eventually our list of stories, which is in the stories component. So this is the minimum but complete representation of the state of this example app. Okay, so now that we have seen what components are and what props components are and what states are and how we could use these components for breaking the complexity of our UI, we're going to see how to use them to build a palette of reusable components. So a set of encapsulated components which we could use everywhere. So let's imagine a real scenario, which is a dialogue. I mean, in my company we are full of dialogues. I suppose this is, many of you can relate. So there are many flavors, and many of them are similar to others, but only few things change. So this is, I suppose, a concrete and real problem. So let's assume that the engineers and the designers just sat in a room for 2 weeks deciding this hierarchy, sweating, of course, a lot of effort, and then at the end they are happy because they realize that there could be a main dialogue which has a toolbar, and then there could be other 2 dialogues which in turn inherit this toolbar and adds one a title and another a footer, and then there could be other 2 dialogues that in turn inherits these other dialogues and add a subtitle and the notch for managing the notch on the new devices. And they are enthusiastic about that and they're very happy, but at a certain point the door of the meeting room creaks and product comes in and says, guys, I don't want to break your eggs, but we have another dialogue in our domain. It is called Ultimate Dialogue, and it inherits everything from the shiny dialogue and the marvelous dialogue. But this is already kind of suicide for the engineering and the design team, because the first question that they wonder is, okay, so we can't have multiple inheritance in our domain, so should it be some of the shiny dialogue or of the marvelous dialogue? And there's not a real answer for that. And another problem is that product raises the hand and says, guys, I've got a small detail. Well, I say that the ultimate dialog inherits everything from the mother's dialog, but that's not really true because it doesn't have a footer. Okay, this is a scenario which very often turns into hostility. Engineers can't take this kind of complexity, designers either. So, as I said, there is no easy solution for this if you want to solve it with inheritance. We should just sit again for 2 weeks in this room and rethink the whole hierarchy from scratch. And then we should make a blog post hoping that nobody will enter telling us that there is 7 and 8 flavor of dialogue. Or we can use composition for solving this problem, which is another technique, which is another principle that React endorses very much. Composition by sitting and building a hierarchy of components, you can just have your set, your palette of components. So there is no inheritance, there are no relationships. We have a dialog toolbar, a dialog title, and subtitle, and notch, and who cares? And then we build how many dialogs we want, hopefully not, but we build how many dialogs we want just by using in composition these components. Okay, this opens to many permutations and possibilities. This principle is called composition over inheritance, and it says that we should achieve reusability and polymorphic behavior by composing pieces and not by making one inherit another. And well, the benefits of this principle is clear. So the design is simpler and mostly more flexible. There is no need to sit and decide a hierarchy. There is no need to say, okay, guys, these are our relationships, and they should stay at least for 6 months like this. There are no relationships at all, and this enables future changes to be very fast, very quick, and painless. I went very fast. I'm already at conclusions. So, okay, so let's get some conclusions. At the end, what I want to say is that it's not true that developers are lazy. They just feel a lot the weight of code complexity. So, I think we should help them. And thinking in React is very good at bringing code complexity into conversation at a very early stage. And that, in my experience, helps and avoids all its implied consequences. And then if we apply the best practices and good pattern that React gives us, we see that designers and engineers start seeing at domain entity, looking at domain entities from the same perspective. And this allows a more flexible and simple design. At the end, last but not least, I would like to say that React, of course, is not the only front-end technology that allows this. I picked React because in the last 2 years in ProntoPro, we just started doing these best practices. We just started following these good patterns naturally, without even noticing. So the technology gave us a lead. The technology gave us a path to do that. But of course, we could reach the same results with other technologies like Vue.js and Angular that share most, let's say, of these best practices and good patterns. And they also might be a better pick for your team and your project. So this was my last slide. I'm sorry, I was a little bit fast. It's been a real pleasure to be here, so I thank you